a little late, but it worked out.
I'm just finding that lately air travel has gotten a lot better.
You're giving Kiddush?
Yeah, I have your side on Monday. Yeah, time desert. Oh, Shoy, thank you very much. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shakol neh b'dvarei. But it's wet. Dr. Gemara. So yesterday we learned how on the tzaddik you hold like Rabbi Akiva, that you could bring the breads without the carbon. You could bring the shtei lechem without the two kvasim. According to that shita, what do you do with the breads? So the Gemara said that the breads ultimately have to be burnt. Either me'ikra din it would be mutter ba'achila, and the Gemara brought two makaris to that. Either a hekesh from the pasuk in the parashas of Shavuos that call it bikurim, which means it's brought without a carbon and it's nechal, or we had a raya from the brayso that discussed the kohanim whether or not they're mechuyev in shkolim, and even though me'ikra din it's roy lachila al tzera, we don't let them eat it because we're afraid that next year, if they have an animal to bring, where you wouldn't be able to eat those breads before the Zrika Saddam, people might not realize and say, last year they ate it without any Zrika, so why can't we eat it this year without a Zrika? That was one shita. The other shita was that they're made l'sreifa, and you would burn them not when they become nicer, rather you burn them as soon as you could no longer bring a carbon. The reason for that is because if you burn it in the middle of the day, you might find a kvasim an hour later, and then you could have brought it together with the kvasim. So you wait till you could no longer bring kvasim, even if they would arrive, because it would be after the closing of the Beis HaMikdash for the day, and that's why, and then we burn it. So Tanur Rabban, Kiv Ze'etzeres, Ein Mekachin Es Alechem Ela B'Shchita. What makes them be Mekadesh Alechem, the Shchita? Obviously, we're going on the tzad that it's not the tenufa. Ketzad, shachta l'shman v'zarak daman l'shman. This is a textbook case of how it's supposed to be done. Kiddush alechem, the lechem will become kaddish. But what about shachta and shaloi l'shman? You shechted the karban and shaloi l'shman, v'zarak daman shaloi l'shman, then like kiddush alechem. So this lechem really still is called mammon hektish. It's bedek abayis, but it does not have Kedusha Saguf. What about Shachtan Lishman? The Shchidu was done Lishman, but Vizarak Daman Shaloi Lishman. So there we have a Machlokes Tanaim. Rabbi says, Halechem Kadosh Veinai Kadosh. It's Kadosh, but it's not quite Kadosh. And what exactly that means, the Gemara is going to bring another Machlokes about. Divrei Rabbi. Rabbi Elazar Shimon Omer la'olam einay kadosh ad sheyishchot l'shman v'yizraik daman l'shman. Everything has to be done l'shma, or else the breads don't have a kedusha saguf at all. My time with the Rebbe, what's as far as Rebbe that the shchita itself does it, even though the zrika is shaloi l'shma, it still gets a kedusha. Tichsiv v'yesa ayil yasa zevach shlomim l'Hashem. Al salamatzos. Now, the makor of shtei lechem, we said yesterday, was from the Ayil Nazir, that the carbon shlomim, the carbon is what is mekadesh, the breads. But it says, V'so'al yasa zevach shlomim. It says, yasa zevach. So we learn from here, remember the shchita mekacha, because it says yasa zevach shlomim. It's the zevach that does it. But Rabbi Elazar Shimon says Yasa. It says Yasa Zevach Shlamim. Yasa would mean Achi Yasa Kalasa Yosef. When do the breads become kaddish? After all of the necessary steps that has to happen to the animal until that happens, and that's not only the shchita, that's the zrika as well. For the Gemara of a Rebbe Nami Haksiv Yasa. What does Rebbe do with the word Yasa, which according to Rabbi Elazar Shimon seems to indicate that until the whole process is done, it's not mekadesh lechem. So he will say, ikos of zevach yasa. If it's at zevach yasa, kidekamrit. You have to shecht it, and yasa, you have to do the other steps of the process. But hashadichs of yasa zevach, that's saying b'ma yasa bezvicha. The only asiyah that needs to be accomplished in order to be mekadosh shalachem is the zvicha. I've Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon aksiv zevach. It says the zvicha as well. Zokt Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon ahumi boyelei lichad Rabbi Yochanan. So yasa is the focus word. Until all the processes are done, the lechem is not kadosh. Why did it say zevach? The Omer Rabbi Yochanan hakol moedim sheyeh lechem shetzorich sheyeh lechem b'shas shchita. The lechem has to be there b'shas shchita. You can't first come up with a lechem after the shchita and say that the finalization of the process, the zricha, is what is the most important step. No, the lechem has to be there from the beginning. Where does it physically have to be? In the Zohar. Yeah, it has to be in the Zohar. Fact the Gemara, my kadosh ve'ina kadosh. Rebbe said that the status of this bread, where the shchita was done lishma, but the zrika was done shaloi lishma, it's kadosh ve'ina kadosh. What exactly does that mean? Abaya Omar, what it means is kadosh ve'ina gomer. It's kadosh, but it's not complete. Weiter, what does that mean? The Gemara is going to explain shortly. Rava Omar, it's kadosh ve'enei nitar. It's kadosh, but it's not ever going to be released to the kaihanim to be eaten. My benayu, what is the exact machlokes between Abaye and Rava? Now this next line is very disputed, so I'm going to read it like Rashi's maskana. Ika benayu lemitvas pejoinei. The nafkamina would be is if you wanted to be poided. If it became possible, now you want to be poided, can you be poided at that time? So there was a shchita of lishma, a zrika shaloi lishma, it's halfway kadosh according to Rebbe, could I be poided? La abaye tofis pejoinoi, so that's what I'm changing here. La abaye tofis pejoinoi, and la rava einoi tofis pejoinoi. According to Abaye, it will be tofis, and according to Rava, it will not be tofis. Why am I changing the girsa? Rashi, in his first pshat, learns the Gemara exactly like the girsa we have. La abaye loy tofis pejoinoi. But if you look a little bit further down in Rashi, Rashi then says, Shibush Gomer Huzeh. The entire pshat that I just said in this Gemara is a complete and total mistake. And he goes through why it's a mistake. And then he comes up, Veloshin Hagun, who la'abaye tofus pejoinoi, u'lerova loy tofus pejoinoi. And let's see Rashi here. La'abaye damer einoi gomer. Tosfos Grade has a problem with Rashi's second pshat as well. But let's see Rashi. La'abaye damer einoi gomer. Abaye said it's not a complete hektish, meaning adayin loy chala alav kedushas haguf gemura. So this bread starts off. It's bought with mom and hektish. It's bought with mom and the tibur. It has kedushas domim. Now the shchita and the zrika process gives the kedushas haguf. Zok Abaye, part of it there's kedushas haguf chalan, but part not. So it didn't completely get saturated, if we can use that word, with kedushas haguf. Therefore, vakat is shaykh bei pidyon. Because Abaye is going to learn, until it becomes saturated with Kedushas Haguf, when it's still in the process of getting its Kedushas Haguf, it's still called Kedushas Mamain, and therefore you could still be paid it with money, and the whatever Kedushas on it will be completely removed, and it will go on the money. Even though it becomes hutar b'miktas, it becomes kadosh b'miktas through the shechita itself. It shouldn't be able to go chulin. Miu akati mechuser gemar kedusha. It didn't complete yet its absorption of being fully kedushas aguf, and therefore v'shayich bei kedushas domim litvos pidyoinoi b'kedusha. The breads, since it's not yet fully transitioned to Kedushas Aguf, we treat it like Kedushas Mammon, and therefore you can be paided. Rava the Amar Kadosh Gomer, Rava said it's Kadosh Gomer, Kedushas Aguf. He holds it is a complete Kedushas Aguf. Therefore, lo shayich be pidyon. You could no longer be poided because you cannot be poida any animal with kedusha zuguf or anything of kodesh that has kedusha zuguf. You can't be poida. Vin hitvis mois pidyoinoi einan itvasen. If you said I want a kedusha from this bread that has kedusha zuguf to go on this money, it won't go. It doesn't work. The kivon deini yotzim kedusha klau ezoi mois. Yeah, since it will not lose its kedusha, because once it has kedusha zaguf, that kedusha zaguf will not be able to go off of it. So then the money won't become kodesh because the kedusha only comes if it's taken off the other item. So that's what the Gemara says according to Rashi. My beinayu ikabedai lemitvas pejoinai labai tafis pejoinai, because it's not kodesh gomer. And therefore, we don't treat it like kedusha zaguf, and l'rava tafis pidyoinai because we treat it like kedusha zaguf. It's l'rava loy tafis pidyoinai according to Rashi's girsa because it's kedusha zaguf. Zakama bishleim l'rava according to Rava that you cannot be paided. We have to go back to the big machlokes because Abaye and Rava is only arguing what Rebbe meant. But let's not forget that Rebbe was arguing with Reb Shimon ben Elazar who holds that until this rika is done, it's not kadosh at all. So, Rava, who holds that there is a kedusha zaguf on this bread and you cannot be paid it, where Rabbi Elazar ben Shimon holds this lechem is not kadosh at all and you can be paid it quite easily. Rebbe holds kadosh v'ne kadosh, there is a kedusha on it, it's a kedusha zaguf on it, and you cannot be paid it. Elul Abaye, who holds that you could be paid it because it doesn't get a kedusha's mammon. Well, then my ika ben Rabbi Eliezer ben Rabbi Eliezer ben Shimon. Rabbi and Rabbi Eliezer ben Shimon both hold that until the zrika is done l'shma, it doesn't become kadosh b'kedusha zaguf. So then, how are they arguing? Zok Gemara ika beinayu liv suli b'yotzei. According to Rabbi Eliezer ben Shimon, it's not kadosh at all until after the zrika is done. So if this bread left the azara after the shechita, it would not be possible because it's not yet kadosh yet until the zrika occurs. But according to Abaye, it's kadosh v'ene kadosh. Yes, I agree that you could be paid it. True, but the fact of the matter is, there's still some kedusha on it. The kedusha zaguf is in the middle of saturating it. Therefore, it would be possible. B'yatzei. Boy miner Reb Shmuel bar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Abchia bar Abba. Kivzei atzeres shachlan l'shmon. You shachlan the kivzei atzeres l'shmon, but v'zarak daman shaloi l'shmon. So oisei alechem. That lechem, mahu be'achila. Can you eat that bread? Are you allowed to eat that bread? We were discussing the halacha. If it can be pointed, it's kodesh the kodesh, but are you allowed to eat this bread? Let's understand your shaila. Let's understand the parameters. Alibidaman. According to which Tana are you clearing this? According to Rabbi Elazar ben Shimon, ha'amar zrika hita mekacha. Zrika is mekadeshit. It doesn't have the din of a carbon. It's a regular kedushas domim, and kedushas domim you can't eat. You'd have to be pointed. So of course, Rashi says v'haya afilu kadosh lehava kol shekein dasar b'achila. It's regular momon hektish. Of course, you're not allowed to eat it. You're only allowed to eat lechem that gets the kedushas aguf, and then it becomes niter v'shchitu v'zrika. Then the koyanim can eat it. But here it's still kedushas domim on it, according to Shimon. According to Rabbi Elazar ben Shimon, because it didn't become kadosh with kedushas aguf until after the zrika. Okay, and the libud de Rebbe, well, bein la Abaye, bein la Rava, kadosh ve'enei niterhu. So according to Abaye, it's high according to Rava. It's kadosh, but it cannot be niter because the zrika was done shaloi l'shema, so you wouldn't be able to eat it. So we're a little bit stuck over here. We're a little bit stuck, as Rashi says. Ben l'Abaye, ben l'Rava, kadosh ve'enei niter. The kivud amar Abaye einei gomor, kol shekein einei niter. For sure, it would not be niter. So exactly who are you asking this shaila? According to whom would you consider this bread to be mutter ba'achila? Zoktimor, there's actually a third Tana that we didn't mention yet. The Tana Avu Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, the father of Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, learned the following Mishnah. Brisa. What happens if the shtei alechem left the azara after the shchita, but before the zrika? So, if does it have a psul yaitze or not? So we just had a discussion about the psul yoytze, where Abaye says it would have, according to Abaye, according to Rebbe, it would have a psul yoytze, and according to Rebbe Lezer B'Shimon, it wouldn't. What happens according to this Tana? The shtei lechem monat ben shchit l'zrika v'zorak domon shel kvasim chutz l'zmanon, and then the zrika sadam was done with a machshav of pigel. So now the animal is for sure surely pigel. But what about the bread? Is the bread connected to the animal still? It was yoytze. So is it connected to the animal still, and it'll also be posel machmas pigel because it's part of the package? Or once it left the Beis Hamikdash, it's no longer part of the package anymore, and the fact that the animal became pigel does not impact the bread. If you chayiv kors, if you eat it, because you can't eat it anyway, right? Good point. Good enough means if you chayiv kors. So zok to Gemara, zok to Brisa, Rabbi Eliezer Omer ein belechem mishum pigel. There would not be an issue pigel on this lechem because this lechem was not impacted by this rika because it was yoytze. Rabbi Kiva Amar yesh belechem mishum pigel. The Amar Absheshes Hani Tanoi Kerebi Svirlu. Both these Tanoim hold like Rebbe. The Amar Shchita Makacha. Because if it's not Kadosh until the Zrika, there's no question over here. Of course it's not Pigel. It's not Kadosh yet. So according to Rebbe, where it's Kadosh, Yevena Kadosh, that is our Shaila over here. Would it take on a halacha of Pigel? Miu Rabbi Eliezer Latemei, Rabbi Eliezer who said Ein Belechem Mishum Pigel, because he holds Ein Zrika Mai Elas Liyotzei. He has an Algemein Shita. What if everything was going good and the bread left and the Zrika Saddam was done? It wouldn't work. You wouldn't be able to eat the bread. So he holds the Zrika does not have an impact on the breads if the breads left the Azara. Who adin? If it was a piece of meat in a carbon that left the Azara, the Zrika wouldn't work for it, even though the Zrika works for the rest of the carbon. So it works both ways. If it's not working to be matter the basar b'achila, it's also not going to work to make the basar into pigel if the Zrika was with a machshava pigel. Rabbi Kiva tamei damar Zrika ma'elas liyaitze. And Rabbi Kiva holds Zrika would work for yaitze. If Vibalti holds it would work for yaitze, hu adin, it will make it pigel. As Rashi says, Ein Zrika ma'elas liyaitze, according to Rabbi Eliezer, Hilchach loy kavatia lelechem bepigel. It will make the lechem into pigel. The kvar posalu, the moment it was yaitze, it became posel. V'yamar b'perkama in pigel b'makim psul. We know that pigel could never be chal if there's already another psul there. And Rabbi Kiva holds Zrika ma'elas liyaitze, the posel machmas the davar achahu. We learned that if the psul is not mineu bay, like it became tummy or something, but the psul is merely because of where it's situated, that would not prevent the zrika from impacting the meat, or in our case, the bread. Okay, so we still don't know what the shaila is, but we came up with a machlokes tanoim as to whether or not zrika melas liyaitze, and therefore, if the zrika was done with a mechshavas pigel, it would impact the bread, versus Rabbi Eliezer, who holds Ein Zrika Melas Liyaitze. The Tanan we learned. Emurei Kadishim Kalim Shiyatzu Lefnei Zrikas Tam. So the shaila is not only if a bread went out, even if they murim of Kadishim Kalim. A part of the Shlomim left the Azara before they made the Zrika. Rabbi Eliezer Ein Moyalim Bahen. You're not going to be moyal. Vein Chayav Nalaya Mishum Pigel. Now, by Kadishim Kalim, we say it's moment bailamu. When does it become kodesh? After the trika, once it becomes lachmoy shal mizbeach. So once it becomes lachmoy shal mizbeach, that's when there would be a din me'ilah, if everything was done properly. In this case, the Baaltei Murim did not become lachmoy shal mizbeach because they were not in the azara. B'shas, the zrikas damim. Therefore, the zrikas damim has no impact on them. And therefore, there won't be a din me'ilah on them, because they're still moment bailam, because they were never hutar lemizbeach. And if the zrika would have been done with a machshav of pigel, vein chayovin lemishum pigel v'noisar v'tamei. You're not going to be chayiv for eating them, the pigel v'noisar v'tamei, because either one would only work if the zrika sadam would impact it. And since Rabbi Eliezer holds the zrika sadam does not impact anything that left Azara, it's as if it didn't have Zrika Saddam. But Rabbi Kiva Omer, Moyalim Bahen, V'chayavin Alei Mishum Pigel V'noisha V'tamei, as we said on Amar Alf, because he holds Zrika Mo'elas Liyaitze. So now that we have this machlokes, now we could clear the shaila that we started this whole sugi with, that the father of Rabbi Yirmiyah asked the following shaila. Who was asking the shaila? Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yitzchak. I'm sorry. So Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yitzchak, now we're going to explain what his shaila was. So Zog to Gemara. What is the halacha? And Rashi tells us we're asking according to Rabbi Kiva, who holds that the zrika is moyelas. So if the zrika is moyelas, the zrika does have an impact on the breads that left Azara, and therefore the breads that left Azara, if the zrika was done with a machshava of pigol, it would be possible. So therefore the shaila is as follows: midas rikas pigol kava lelechem bepigol biyoytze. Vibalt the zrika of pigol is koivei alechem bepigol, because that's what Rabbi Kiva said on the Amud Aleph. B'yoytze, even though it was yoytze, just like kabosar, just like if the meat was yoytze as well. So therefore, zrika shaloi l'shema nami shari leila lechem. So let's drill down a minute. How does it work? How does it work if we're looking at it from a more granular? How does it look? How does it work that the zrika is my elas liyoytze according to Rabbi Kiva? You know why it's my elas liyoytze and it'll become pigol? Because it's kibasar. We look at the bread as if it's the meat of the carbon. That's how we bind them together. We consider it mamish one unit, and therefore, since the basar are carbon itself, which was in the Azara at the time of the Zrika, got a psul of pigel, well, so to the basar, even though it left, it's bottled to the meat, it's part of the meat, and therefore it's going to be pigel. So what about a Zrika shalolish manami, shari lei lechem? Maybe it will be matir the lechem because it's also matir the meat. The meat will become mutter if you made a Zrika shalolish ma, like any carbon that's done shalolish ma, it's kosher. Or maybe lechumra arminon lekula arminon. We'll only say that the zrika helps for the yoytze. That's only lechumra to pass it mishum pigol, to make it have it in meila, but not to be matir it lachila. Not at the shaila. So let's see Rashi. Kloimer libud Rabbi Kiva me ba'ilei Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak. Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak is asking his soul shaila according to the sheet of Rabbi Kiva, who holds that zrika helps for a yoytze. Midrikas pigol cover leila lechem bepigol. Vibalt Rabbi Kiva holds that the zrikas pigol of the dam of the carbon will also answer the bread that left. The afagav the zrika psulahi, even though technically it's a zrika psula. Why legabi the bread the yoytzehu? Because the bread was not in the azar b'shas the zrika. Cover lelechem bepigol. It'll make the lechem pigol. Ki basar, just like the basar that was not yoytze, kishar basar shaloyotza, because we say it's part of the basar. Alma, what do you see from here? That lechem keguf hakvasim. We look at the lechem as if it's actual meat. That's how much we consider them one and the same. The guf hakvasim mifugalim, the same way the kvasim became pigol, because the zrika was on them and they were not yoytze. Lechem nami mefugol, even though it's yoytze, because it takes on the identity as the basar. So therefore, we want to stretch this concept and say that the basar is one and the same with the lechem. In a case where there was a zrika shaloi l'shmonami, the psulahi, maybe shari lahu, it would be matir the bread, just like the meat becomes mutter. We know any zavach that was shechted shaloi l'shma will be kosher. It's only but it's kosher, and the meat's eaten. So maybe the bread can be eaten, even though the zrika was done shaloi l'shma. But lechem nami kiguf hakvasim damu. Once we've established that the Kiva Shita is that the lechem is treated just like the basar itself, and with the kvasim nechalim, lechem nami nechal. So maybe the lechem should be eaten. So that was the shayla. If the zrika was done shaloi l'shma, if the basar is eaten, maybe the lechem should be eaten as well. We don't say that the zrika is ma'elas liyoytze to help be matir b'achila. Rather, leaning zrika sheina again. This going shalol l'shemon lava lechem guva kvasim lios lechem nechos. We don't say that, but you only say that the zrika works to make it worse. L'moshel to make it pickle, l'moshel to make it chayv meila. So that is how the Gemara wanted to explain the Shaila of Rabbi Shmuel by Rabbi Yitzchak. It's totally in the Machlokes, Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Eliezer, and the whole Shaila is according to Rabbi Kiva. For extra Papa, that's not logical to say because you might have it all wrong. Matzgavol Rapapa. How do you know that your whole understanding of this Machlokes, if it's Rika, is my Elis Liyaitze? I'm going to show you, I'm going to open your eyes to show you a whole different shot in the Machlokes Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Eliezer that has nothing to do if whether Zrika is Mo'elis Liyoitze or not. Because Umimaidichi is to nu avroi pligi. You're assuming that when the Brisa says the Lechem left the Azara and then there was a Zrika done, you're assuming that the Lechem was not in the Azara at the time of the Zrika. But maybe that's not the case. Maybe the question is the Lechem left the Azara, came back into the Azara, and then the Zrika was done. And the question is the fact that it once left the Azara, will that passel it? So it's not a Shaila of a Zrika is Mayalos Liyaitze. So Matzkel or Papa. Umimaidechi isnu avroi pligi. Who said the Machlokes is only about if the Lechem was not inside the Azara at the time of the Zrika? That's where the Machlokes is? No. Maybe Rabbi Kiva agrees to Rabbi Eliezer that Zrika me'elis liyaitze, and it would not be pigel in such a case. So where is the case where Rabbi Kiva argues with Rabbi Eliezer and says that it's going to be pigel? Uvahadar ailinu pligi. The machlokes is if it was yaitze, but then it came back in before the Zrika. It took a coffee break. It took a smoke break. It left Azara for a minute, then it came back in, but it was there for the critical part for the Zrika. So the Rabbi Eliezer saw our law Karebi. Rabbi Eliezer is like Rebbe who holds the Omar Shchita Makacha, the Shchita is Makadishit. And therefore, V'ifsul B'yoytze. It's once the Shchita is Makadishit, there's a Psul Yoytze, it's not allowed to leave the Azara anymore. And maybe Rabbi Kiva holds like Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon, the Omar Shchita Loy Makacha. The Baal didn't become Kurdish yet, it won't become possible Yoytze. And as long as it's in the Azara, B'shas Zrika, it's perfectly kosher. It's pristine. But you don't have a riot to your concept that Rabbi Kiva holds that the basar and the lechem is one thing. You don't have a right to the whole concept at all. So therefore, you no longer have an explanation, b'chalal, to what Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yitzchak Shaila was. We're sort of at a dead end. We don't have anybody where we could say that Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yitzchak Shaila would make sense as to whether or not you're allowed to eat this bread. Zok Gemara Haimai. Iyomit b'shlema Rabbi Kiva karebi sfirli. B'shlema, if you hold that Rabbi Kiva holds like Rabbi and not like Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon, because in this pshat that Rav Papa asked, we have to align Rabbi Kiva with Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon. So if you hold Rabbi Kiva holds like Rabbi Sfirlei, the Amar Shchita Mekachalahu, Hainu de Amar Rabbi Kiva, the Kachahu Lubishchita. Then Rabbi Kiva's Shita makes sense because the Shchita made a Lechem Kodesh, Yosy Zrika and Kavalu Bepigel. And the Zrika has an impact on the breads that left and make it into Pigel. If you're going to argue that Rabbi Kiva holds like Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon and it doesn't become Kodesh until after the Zrika, the Yamar Zvicha loy mikdesha. Well, then Zrika's pigol mi mikdesha. What do you want to say? Rabbi Kiva holds that the Zrika is the completion of making the breads kodesh, and even the Zrika of pigol will make the breads kodesh just to make them into pigol. A Zrika of pigol shouldn't make the breads kodesh in the first place. So why would Rabbi Kiva say that the breads are also machmas pigol? The Amar of Gidol Amarav, Zrika's pigol ain't a mevia lidei meila. Rabbi Gidol Amarav said that the Zrika of pigol will not bring it lidei meila, the ain't a matzir lidei meila, and it will not take out something from the din meila if it was already with a kedusha saguf. So we know a korban shlomim, as we said earlier, it does not become a bar meila until after the Zrika's dam. And it makes it royal mizbeach, and makes it no longer mum and bailam, there's a din meila. So therefore, Rabbi Gidol and Rav said, a zrika of pigel will not bring it to the meila, meaning if it was a korban shlomim, and we're talking about a murim of korban shlomim, and the zrika was done with a machshav of pigel, there will not be a din meila on those evarim. And ve'ena matzid midei meila, if we're talking about a regular korban, where before the zrika, it's already a bar meila, and the zrika is materit la'achila, this zrika doesn't work for it because it's a zrika pickle. So Edom Avil Emila Beimura Kadashim Kalam that only become royal Me'ilah after the zrika. Ve'edom Atibade Me'ilah is Bebasar Kache Kachem. So Oibazoy, according to Rav Gidol, you cannot say this pshat in Rabbi Kiva that he holds like Rabbi Elazar B'Shimon, and that's why the breads become Aser B'Isra Pigel, because they became Aser B'Isra Pigel through this Rika. Rabbi Gidol says that it wouldn't work. Zog to Gemara, that's not a kasha. Lavi Toisiv, the Rav Gidol Amarav. If you look there in, I believe in Me'ilah, Rav Gidol Amarav was Augushlagen. We don't paskin like that. And we actually paskin that even a Zrika of Pigel will make something kodesh l'yim pigel. So it's a funny scenario over here. We know you need shchita and zrika in order to be able to make this bread into part of the korban. And the zrika was done with a machshav of pigel. So you would think, if it's a machshav of pigel, it's not a proper zrika. If it's not a proper zrika, how could it be mekadosh lechem? Zokt Rabbi Kiva, no, it's mekadosh lechem, and it makes it into pigel. And that's a very big chiddush, but once we know we hold like that, so then Rabbi Kiva might hold like Rabbi Elazar B'Shimon, and therefore we don't have any basis for the shaila of Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yitzchak. Zok to Gemara weiter. Boy minei Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabbi Zera. Kivsei Atzeres, back to Kivsei Atzeres. Sheshachton l'shmon, and after the shchita, v'ovar halechem. We lost the bread. Ma'u sheyizrak domon Shaloi lishmon lahatir basar ba'achila. Now, once the lechem went missing, this korban can no longer be kivsei atzeres, because the lechem went missing. If you hold that the lechem is going to be ma'akar, right? Once the shchita is done, according to Rabbi Akiva, we're saying that it's one and the same with the korban. If the lechem went missing, the korban is possible. But that's if you want to keep it as kivsei atzeres. What if I shechted lechatchila shaloi lishma l'shem shlomim? What if I make this rika lechatchila shaloi l'shem shlomim? Then it should work fine. So the question is, what is the halacha? Ma'u sheyizrak domin shaloi lishman. Make this rika not al kivsei atzeres. Make it as a standard korban shlomim. At least lahater basar ba'achila, so that you can at least eat the meat. Amar lei. So Rabbi answered, think about this. Yesh lach davar she'enai kosher l'shmoi. Can you possibly have a scenario where if you made this rika l'shma l'shem kivsei atzeres, it'll be possible because the breads are missing. But the kosher shaloi l'shmoi. But if you make this rika sadam l'shem shlomim, it'll be kosher. That's counterintuitive. Why is it counterintuitive? I'll show you precedents to such a thing. V'loy v'arei Pesach koydem chatzois, where you're not supposed to shech the korban Pesach yet. Then the kosher l'shmoi. If you shechted it l'shem Pesach, it would be possible. But if you shechted it l'shem shlomim, it would be kosher. The kosher shaloi l'shmoi. So you see, it's such a situation where you could shech something l'shmoi, it will be possible. But if you shech it shaloi l'shmoi, it will be kosher. Zaktamari, that I know exists, but this is a more unique precedent we need. Because haki kamina, this is what I'm saying. Yesh lach davar shenir l'shmoi. The korban Pesach before Chatzos never really was a korban Pesach yet. It's too early. But here it already was. It already was the kivsei atzeres. V'nitchami l'shmoi. And because the bread was missing, now I can no longer continue the process as kivsei atzeres. And therefore, if I made this rika l'shem kivsei atzeres, it will be possible. Yet the kosher shaloi l'shmoi. Yet I could make this rika l'shem shlomim and it'll work. That's counterintuitive. Again, Zakmar Veloy, it's not counterintuitive at all. I'll show you precedents to such a halacha. V'rei Pesach achers manai. What if you had a korban Pesach and you didn't check it on Erev Pesach? So now it's the next day. Bishar Yemois Hashana. What is halacha? It's a shlomim. So once again, it's something that was roy for a korban Pesach. It's no longer roy to be a korban Pesach, and now it's a shlomim. So why do you find it so hard to understand? The kivsei atzeres was originally kivsei atzeres. It's no longer roy to be kivsei atzeres because the lechem went missing, and now it's going to be a shlomim. What's so hard to understand? So yesh lach davar shenir l'shmoi. It was good l'shmoi. to shechted as kivsei atzeres, v'nishchat l'shmoi, and as a matter of fact, it was already shechted l'shem kivsei atzeres, and after the shechita, v'nitchami l'shmoi, now it can no longer be kivsei atzeres because the bread went missing, ve'enei kosher l'shmoi, and therefore it will not be kosher if you made the zrikas adam l'shem the kivsei atzeres, yet the kosher shaloi l'shmoi. Yet it will be kosher shaloi l'shmoi. That you don't have by Korban Pesach, because the Korban Pesach, we're saying by the time you're shechting it already, it's a shlamim. But here, when you shechted it, it was kivsei atzeres. In middle, you're changing it. You don't find such a thing. So that's what you do. V'loi, v'arei toida. What about a toida? We know a toida, if the breads went missing, you did a shaloi l'shma, it's going to be fine if you shechted it, if you made the zrika l'shem shlamim. So that's very different. Shainu toida, terachmona kaya shlamim. Yeah, the reason why Toida can so easily transition into a Shlomim, because the Torah calls the Toida, in fact, a carbon Shlomim. But the Shtei Alechem and the Kivsei Atzeres are not called a Shlomim. They're not referred to as a Shlomim, and therefore, can you possibly say such a thing? So, what was the Shaila? Can you now, after you lose the breads, make the Zrikal Shem Shlomim? That remains a Shaila. Taner Rabbanan. What would happen if shochat shnei kavosim al arba chalois? You only need 2 chalois. You had a mind for 4 chalois. So the halach is you don't need 2. You don't need 4. You only need 2. So moishech shtayim take 2 out of the 4, umanifon, and you can make tenufa on them. Vashar nechalois bepidyon, and the other bread, the 2 extra ones that are still mom and hektish, you'll be paid to them, and that's how you'll eat them. Okay, we'll stop here, and we'll be Mamshech B'ez Hashem tomorrow, starting from Tanur Rabbanan, 2 lines on the bottom on Mem Zayin on days.
Yeah.
So a bunch of Shabbos will probably learn. Shabbos is getting later, so we were learning 7:45. We'll probably have to start around 8, and we'll learn Shabbos after then as well. Now from Mincha.